Economics. Okay, so this is part two, or this is the next series of notes after the economic system. So let's move forward. So when we're discussing, we've already discussed the different type of economic systems. So we have another question that we need to discuss, or we need to kind of ponder before we move forward. And that is, when we start talking about economies, we have to think about what are the types of things that people have developed or created over time to help them like meet their needs and wants. Like, what is it that people do? What is it that civilizations, what types of tools have civilizations developed to help make their lives easier, to give them the things that they need for survival, and also the things that they want for leisure? And we'll start discussing some of these. The first one is agriculture. And this is just something pretty simple. Agriculture is just the cultivation of crops and livestock for food. When you guys think about farmers, that is what it's called. What they do, agriculture. Now, agriculture falls under the category of being what we call a primary economic activity. And what those are activities that use natural resources directly from the earth, and it normally takes place near the natural resource that is being gathered or used. So normally you'll see farming, agriculture, those things, mining, those things take place. They come from the earth, and the processing of it comes from directly from where it is. So some examples of agriculture are farming, grazing, forestry, and mining. So these are some different examples. You see fishing, farming, agriculture. These are examples of agriculture. Now, industry is something different than agriculture. It is actually taking the raw goods that one receives from agriculture, like what the raw vegetables or the raw mineral ores, or those things that you take from the ground, and then refining it for something that can be used for people. So it's the actual manufacture of goods and services, goods and resources for people. Now, industry is what we would call a secondary economic activity. And the only thing that is when you take something, a raw material. For example, if we just pull a carrot out of the ground, we can eat it, but that's not really how you're supposed to eat it when it comes straight out of the ground. What you're supposed to do is, you want to spray it, you want to wipe it off. It's not ready to go to market when you pull it straight off the ground. Take it, wipe it off, spray it, preserve it, do whatever you need to, bring it to the market. That act of the preserving and spraying and preparing the raw material of the carrot for the market, that is what we refer to as a secondary activity. And this normally occurs close to the resource or the market for the goods. So some examples, though, different than my carrot example that I use, would be manufacturing automobiles, assembling electronic goods, producing electric power. You'll see in these two graphics, and making pottery. So these are some examples of a secondary economic activity. This brings us to the question of what types of economic activities have people developed to meet their wants and needs, part two of that. Service is just like a physical or intellectual activity performed by others. And when we think about service, like I said, it can either be physical or it can be intellectual. There are things that we do. If you do manual labor for someone, you mow someone's grass, for instance, that is a physical. Now, the second thing, though, is service could be if you help someone, if you're teaching someone. That is, if something like a teacher, that is more of a mental. Or if you go to a doctor, that is more of an intellectual activity. Tertiary activities are activities that provide services to businesses. So some examples of tertiary activities or service activities are doctors, teachers, lawn maintenance people, customer service reps, and lawyers. So these are all examples of service and tertiary economic activities. Once again, we'll see doctors, I don't have anything up here for a teacher, but I figure you guys see me every other day, so you know what a teacher looks like. Lawyers, lawn maintenance professionals, customer service reps, the people that when you call in a 1-800 number, or if you call in to have if your lights go out, those people, customer service reps. Now, 2 of the homework questions I want you to make sure that you get knocked out and that you will be responsible for answering on your own are: what physical features of the environment might influence in an economic activity? The only thing that means is how does where you live influence the type of business that you go into. So just think about where we live and the types of things that we do in Louisiana. Think about that television show that I'm ashamed to admit that I watch. Also, what cultural features might influence your economic activity? And what that question is basically trying to get to is what is it in a culture? What types of things in culture that can push certain people, or that can push the people within that culture or ethnic group to have a certain type of job? Now, moving back on, the next concept that we'll discuss is typography. And this is something that we mentioned briefly in Unit 2 when we discussed the Earth. Typography is just the physical features of the land. We kind of discussed this also when we discussed things like a topographic map. And this is what typography. If you take a look at the physical features of the land, for example, the physical features of the land in this illustration, it's a desert area, so we see that the physical features, it's rocky. There's some sparse vegetation. There's a plateau in the background. And climate. Now, climate is something. Climate is, once again, this is a review. It includes the long-term weather patterns of an area. And climate includes everything such as temperature, sunshine, cloudiness, precipitation, humidity, wind speed, all those things that are experienced by an area over a long period of time. That is what makes up the climate. So when we start thinking about typography and climate. Natural resources. Now, when we discuss natural resources, I've mentioned them briefly, and it is something that deals with your economic activities of an area, because oftentimes your natural resources that are available to you, that determines to some extent the types of industry that you can be involved in. So natural resources are substances that come from the earth, and they are provided by nature, and they are not made by people, but we can use them. So some examples of natural resources are things like coal, petroleum, or gas, things that we use for oil, automobiles, gold and silver. These all come from the earth. They're made by nature naturally, but they are things that we as people can use. Now going to renewable resources. And let me go back and double back when we go by natural resources. Natural resources are also, a lot of natural resources can only be used one time. So once we burn up this coal, it cannot be reused. Or once we use all of the oil, it cannot be recreated. We cannot create any more gold, oil, or coal once it's gone. Now, renewable resources are a little different. Renewable resources are resources that come from nature. These are resources that can come from nature, but can be replaced naturally or grown again in a relatively short amount of time. So please remember that. Natural resources, a lot of our natural resources cannot be regrown or replaced by nature, but renewable resources they're different in that they can. And when we start talking about some examples of renewable resources, we mean things like wind energy, hydroelectric power, forests, animals, livestock. If you think about those things, livestock, I guess most of us do not think about livestock as renewable resources, but they are. Now, and another question that we have is, how does technology, going into this of how does technology affect economic activity? We need to define the term technology. And all of these pictures illustrate or give us a clue as to what technology is. And if you guys think about it, we can come up with a good definition. What the construction equipment, the BlackBerry, the robotic factories, the iPad, the trailer, or I'm sorry, darn it, the harvester, this big farming thing. What they all have in common is this. They're all tools that are created by people to help us to be more efficient, to work, to get more work done, to help us get more work done in a quicker amount of time. And that brings us to the definition of, once again, of technology, or is that they're tools, machines, materials, plans, and procedures that aid in the production of goods and services that are used to help people provide for themselves and others. Now, technology usually evolves from people's needs to increase production. If you think about all these, they evolved as a need of us needing to be able to move. For example, the shoveler, as our need evolved from our need to move things quickly, to move earth quicker, to be able to contact each other and then receive email on the go, from our need to be able to produce automobiles quicker, from our need to be able to, same thing, have instantaneous, kind of have the power of a computer like in our hand, but not actually have to carry out a computer. From our need, this develops from our need to be able to harvest, crops quicker. So now going to the levels of development, we'll talk about two different types of countries, and you guys will hear me mention this, or you've heard me mention this before. Well, first we'll discuss developed countries. And what developed countries are, these are countries like the United States, like Canada, like most of the Western countries in Europe, countries that have advanced technology, high levels of industrialization. What that means is that they have many different businesses, and the majority of the people, developed country, and the majority of people work in manufacturing and service industries, and they enjoy a high standard of living. Standard of living is the average income for people. Like how does the average person in a developed country live? The average person in a developed country lives pretty well, especially when you can compare it to undeveloped countries. I know you guys have heard me mention this in class before, but the poor, if you go into the biggest housing development in the United States, or if you go into the average trailer park, you'll find running water. You will find electricity. You will see that they have indoor plumbing, that people do not have to go outside to use the bathroom. In other places of the world, those are things that we take for granted. Because we are a developed country, the poorest of the poor have access to those things. Those are things we take for granted. It is not like that everywhere in the world. And that brings us to developing countries. Developing countries are countries that are less advanced with technology. They do not have access to the internet or cell phones or laptops or all those things that we refer to. Low levels of industrialization, which means they do not have a lot of different businesses and for people to work in. And the majority of people, they work in agriculture and enjoy a low standard of living, which means this is agriculture too. It's to help themselves live from day to day. Okay. And although some commercial farming takes place, most farmers engage in what we call subsistence living. And that means that you are just farming your land to make enough money for you and your family to live. You're not attempting to make a profit and bring money and bring crops to the market. Your main goal is to raise enough, is to have enough to farm enough, raise enough livestock for your family to live on. And just taking a look at this. Now, I want you to video quiz yourself. I want you to ask yourself, what would you think, based on what we've said about developing and undeveloped countries? Does this look like a developed country or an undeveloped country? Now, to me, I would call it a developed country because you see things that we have here in the United States. You see modern things. This looks like Times Square in New York. This is somewhere in Asia, but you see people walking around. You see sidewalks. You see buildings. Let's take a look at the next one. Developing or undeveloped? This is an undeveloped nation. You see people, the best way to say is, does this look like somewhere you would see in the United States? If this looks like something you would see in a typical city in the United States, it's a developed nation. If it's not, it is undeveloped. This. Once again, does it look like something that you would see here? Yes. Or does it look like something that could be in our country? Yes. So this is a developed nation. Developed nation. Undeveloped nation. So hopefully, just kind of testing yourself, you guys will have an opportunity just to be able, hopefully you feel confident about your ability to test or be able to recognize just from pictures a developed or an undeveloped nation. Let's briefly go over your homework questions that are part of your notes outline that you have to answer. The first one is, what are some of the characteristics that developed countries have in common? You can take a look at it. If you want to take a look at these pictures, go back and take a look at these pictures. That is fine. And number 2, what are some of the characteristics that underdeveloped countries have in common? I do not want you to just take a look at those pictures. I want you also to take a look at the map and just your general knowledge, okay, of world geography. That brings us to the next concept that we will discuss, is standard of living. And moving into standard of living, we're taking a look at this map. And what this map shows, actually, it ties right in with developing and the question about developing and undeveloping nations. You see countries with a high standard of living. And remember, what that means, if we say a country has a high standard of living, that means that the people in these countries, the average citizen of those countries, live pretty well. So countries with high standards of living, they're in the gray. United States, Canada, Western Europe. Normally you will see South Africa. That should be there. Japan. And Australia should be in here too. But let's just say countries with a high standard of living, with the GDP per capita of over, let's go with the highest countries, the wealthiest countries: United States, Canada, Europe, Japan. Medium income countries: Australia, New Zealand. And then we'll discuss countries with a low standard of living or underdeveloped nations. You'll see these are generally underdeveloped nations. Central and South America, Europe, Eastern Europe, China, Africa, and Asia. And what standard of living is? The technical definition of standard of living is the level of material comfort that the people of a given country enjoy. This is measured by the goods, services, and luxuries that are available to an individual, to a group, or to a nation. And standard of living also deals with the quantity and quality of goods and services available to people, to the average person in a population, like healthcare, access to healthcare, access to education, access to transportation. All of those go into standard of living. Per capita income deals with how much money each individual citizen receives of the yearly income that is generated by a country. So what happens is you take all of the money that is, to figure out a per capita, you would take all the money that was earned by a company or a country. I apologize, by a country. Then you would divide it by the number of citizens that are in that country or county, and then it will tell you what the per capita income. And what this does is list the per capita income of this graphic, lists the per capita income in 2004 of Ohio and surrounding states. And what that is pretty much the average income of these states. And we'll see New York, Illinois, Pennsylvania. This is the United States national average. Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia. Now, this is just in the the northeast area. Not even so much in the northeast. It's the states that are immediately surrounding Ohio. If you guys remind me, I will pull it up and show you where. We can do one for all 50 states. Gross domestic product. Gross domestic product represents the total value of all goods and services that are produced within a country within a year's time. This graphic illustrates the gross domestic product of the United States per capita growth. And what you see is that since 1940, we have been on a steady incline. As a country, we've been on a steady incline. Now, this does not show the past 5 years. You see, But what you have seen with the past 5 years is dip and back on an incline. So probably the past 5 years would probably look a little bit like this. A question, two of your homework questions is, why is China's GDP or per capita income, why does the average person in China make so little money when we know that China is a wealthy nation and that that country produces so much? Also, what you want to take a look at, another question to answer is, if a country has a GDP, if you're in the red, what does that say about the industry in that country? Or what does that say about the strength of the economy in that country, or how developed the economy in that country is? All right, the end. Make sure you guys answer any questions, all the questions, and highlight what you should. Highlight your homework learning targets. See you in class. Have a good day.